Katerina Yakov watched the German soldiers flee. Streaming from the east, that's what she was seeing. Allied bombers flew above them. She thought they all might die, and then soon there was the silence of all the SS men. When the sun rose the next morning, it was the 1st of May, and they all sang the Internationale. They all sang the Internationale. Katerina Yakov saw red flags flapping in the breeze above the Russian tanks, and she fell upon her knees. And so many different voices in so many different tongues sang the most beautiful song that could ever have been sung. In German, Lithuanian, in Polish and in Dutch, a myriad of melodies has never had been such. In Russian and in Yiddish, Italian and French, emerging from the forests beneath the trench. When the sun rose the next morning, it was the 1st of May, and they all sang the Internationale. When the sun rose the next morning, it was the 1st of May, and they all sang the Internationale. They all sang the Internationale. Völker hört die Signale auf zum letzten Gefecht. Die Internationale erkämpft das Menschenrecht. Völker hört die Signale auf zum letzten Gefecht. Die Internationale erkämpft das Menschenrecht.
Hello and welcome to Revolutionary Socialist Review with Chris Driscoll and Rainer Shea. I'm Chris, and Rainer is here with me. We'll bring him on momentarily. I think we've got an exciting show for everybody tonight, so I'm raring to go. Rainer always says he's raring to go. He's energetic about it. So why don't we just launch in, first of all, to introducing our favorite Marxist scholar and journalist, Rainer Shea.
Oh, hello. Apparently today is Karl Marx's birthday, and we're going to cover this. I hear by promoting a podcast, another podcast.
Yeah. Yes, the from the Party of Socialism and Liberation, they have a thing called Liberation School, and they have relatively new. It came out in April, so that's what, just less than a month ago. A relatively new podcast called Reading Capital with Comrades, and I listened to the first episode. There's several episodes. As you can imagine, because I think they're just covering volume 1 of Capital, but it's got lots of chapters, and it's a long series. It's a radio broadcast, not TV. So, or should I say, audio, not video. So that's particularly good for those of you who enjoy listening to this kind of thing in your car where you can't really watch TV, or in, when you're running or exercising, that kind of thing. Anyway, we'll talk about that more in just a moment. So without further ado, let me just say today, and I should say, by the time most of you see this, it will probably be tomorrow for us, our tomorrow. It will probably be May 6th, 2021. But for us, this evening, a little past 9 p.m. here out in the West, on May 5th, 2021, this is Karl Marx's 203rd birthday. So I always like to recognize these kind of things and celebrate them. And I see it as a way of doing something important politically, and that is promoting the ideas, the work, celebrating the life of Karl Marx. So I'm just going to start off with a few little items that just come straight out of Wikipedia. Wikipedia is often untrustworthy. You know, a lot of it is got insertions by CIA and so forth. But in this, I read it over and I think it's pretty accurate. Oh, I know that it is accurate, because otherwise, for someone as important as Karl Marx, I would not even bother to mention these things. But anyway, Karl Heinrich Marx was born on May 5th, 1818, as I just mentioned, in Trier, a city in Prussia. At that time, Prussia was basically a separate country, a separate nation. It isn't anymore. It's part of Germany now. And at the time, it was part of the German Confederation. So it was actually probably the primary part of the German Confederation, because the Prussian state was pretty strong back in those days in the early 1800s. Anyway, that's where Marx was born. According to Wikipedia, he was a German philosopher, economist, historian, sociologist, political theorist, journalist, and socialist revolutionary. And yes, he was all those things and more. An extraordinary man by anybody's measure. Marx enrolled in the University of Berlin in 1836 and started his academic career. He matriculated to a couple other universities, University of Bonn for a while. But anyway, eventually he got a doctoral degree. That was in 1841. So it didn't take him long. I mean, it started in 1836, 1841. 5 years later, he's getting a doctoral degree. But Marx was a really smart guy and very good student, all in all. On October 15th, 1842, the following year, Marx became the editor of Rheinische Zeitung, which was a popular magazine in Germany. He tripled, under his editorship, he tripled the magazine's circulation, making it one of the leading publications in Germany. However, Marx's editorial writing for the magazine eventually got him into a lot of trouble with the Prussian authorities. And as you might imagine, Prussia was a very authoritarian kind of a place, you know, very German. I mean, it's the most German of German states, I guess you might say. And he was forced, they shut down the magazine. He was forced to move to Paris to take a job editing a Hegelian magazine. From there, he ended up bouncing around to a couple of other places in Europe until eventually he landed in London, England, where he spent the rest of his life. Marx was the author of the Communist Manifesto, along with his closest of all buddies, Friedrich Engels. And he was the author of the 3 volumes of Das Kapital. And both of these public books the three Capital books and Communist Manifesto are among the highest selling books in history. He also was known or became known as the father of communism. In my opinion, to make a long story short, Marx was the greatest thinker to have lived and had the greatest impact on the world of any person in the last millennium. Maybe more than that. I think millennium was as far as I was going to want to go, because I'm not prepared to argue the point over thinkers from, 532 or whatever, Bay Day or whoever the fuck they get as big thinkers back in them days. So, in honor of his 203rd birthday, as we just mentioned, we are promoting, or we want to promote, this new podcast series from the Party of Socialism and Liberation and from their Liberation School that's called Reading Capital with Comrades. So I will be including links down below under this episode of the show when it's posted. You'll be able to find it. It'll say Liberation School on it. So click it and go right to the Reading Capital with Comrades. I tried out the first episode and it was pretty good. I mean, I've read Capital a few times. I think I'm going to try to read it again sometime here in the next 2 or 3 years. It takes some time and effort, to say the least. And the comrades at the PSL have the right idea. This is a book that you really should read with comrades. You should really read it with other people, even if you can't leave home yet because of COVID or any other reason. You can do this over online these days with Zoom, just like Rainer and I do here every week. There are other ways, but of course the best way would be a study circle, few intimate friends and comrades, 5 or 6 or maybe 10 people, and have a study circle. And each take turns leading it, each take turns, taking responsibility for giving a synopsis of it beforehand or before the discussion or whatever, and get together and discuss it. That's my recommendation. But reading Das Kapital, as it was originally named, or Capital as we call it in English, it is a daunting task, but it is one of the most rewarding reads you will ever engage in which you will ever engage, I should say, I guess, to be perfectly sound English-wise. And that's it. There's lots and lots you can say about Karl Marx and his closest collaborator, Friedrich Engels. They together were a phenomena. They together had a greater impact on the world, made more change. There's this famous line that's actually on Marx's tomb in Hyde Park in London. There's a big, beautiful monument above the tomb, and on the monument, it says something to the effect, I think, that philosophers have written about the world for eons, but the object is to change the world. And Marx certainly did that with his work. So, Rainer, over to you.
These are the kinds of productive discussions that we need to be having as Marxists, as opposed to the garbage discussions that those who seek to discredit and sabotage Marxism want us to be having.
Yeah.
You know, there are people who've been trying to discredit the PSL, all of its members, like as a whole, by seizing upon some exaggerated or fabricated controversies. A half a year ago, I remember there's this sketchy event that I'm sorry to say I initially played into what it was trying to do, where this person went on Twitter and claimed that Gloria La Riva, the leader of the PSL, had said something transphobic over a Zoom meeting, like obviously taking the situation out of context and trying to vilify Gloria La Riva and the PSL in general as transphobic. And the tweet got so much traction because all these people on Twitter who hate Marxism or hate the PSL's brand of Marxism were so eager to seize upon it and to talk about it and to engage in the drama. It wasn't until I started to think more critically that I saw through the BS nature of this drama that they were trying to start. And you know, I've encountered other types of like other incidents along those lines where people insert themselves into the communist online community and try to spread rumors as fact, try to divide people, try to throw stuff out there to mess with a movement towards like a real honest intellectual discussion about the issues impacting the socioeconomic future of humanity. This is what it needs to be about at its core. I mean, this is what Marxism is about, talking about how we can bring humanity towards the great opportunity that Marx found we're able to get towards. And now that feudalism has collapsed into capitalism, and now that capitalism is able to then collapse into communism. I mean, that these are our two alternatives: socialism or barbarism. Either capitalism is going to destroy the world, destabilize the world, perhaps make humanity extinct, if not the vast majority of humanity killed, or we're going to get towards a point that past generations have only been able to dream of, which is a state where humanity essentially lives in harmony politically, like no nations have to go to war to defend themselves, no oppressor nations exist, no exploitation in the workplace exists, and from there can stem quite a lot of beautiful potentials. Like we're going to get, if communism were to be implemented, we're going to get a lot closer to utopia than any past society has gotten.
I agree 100%. Capital, especially Volume 1, is Marx's tour de force analysis of how capitalism works, of the motion, the laws of motion of capital, so to speak. It's an extremely a very scientific work, and you get reading those 3 volumes, especially Volume 1 of Capital. You get a better education than you would get in any university, 4-year university degree. You get a better education of how capitalism works than anywhere else you can go. So yeah, I recommend it. It is well worth it, getting that kind of a fundamental grounding in the economic, political, historical, sociological, anthropologic ideas of Marx. And that's the thing about Marx's method. Marx didn't just approach this as an economist. He approached it in what now these days is called a multidisciplinary approach, with bringing in all these various ideas to analyze the capitalist system, which at that time was the dominant system in North America, in Europe, and in some other parts of the world, but today is the dominant economic system in the entire world. There are just a very few socialist workers' states that have made a dent in that and have begun the process of transitioning from capitalism to socialism, and hopefully eventually from socialism to communism, although that hasn't happened anywhere in the world yet. I think it will happen. Personally, I think that the technological changes that we're going to see just in the coming 2 decades is going to light a big fire under that, enable that. There are many requirements and prerequisites, many aspects of what needs to go into creating a communist society, but the technologies that will enable the kind of new economy that we're talking about in a communist society will be much enabled with the kinds of technological changes we're going to see. So I don't mean to come off as a technological determinist. Marx has often been accused of being a technological determinist, and anyone who reads Capital cannot possibly come to that conclusion. But Marx did understand that that was one of the prerequisites, one of the factors that goes into preparing the ground for our eventual growth into a communist society. So with that, let me see where we are at. What next on the agenda here? Number 2, we have the U.S. ruling class plans to destabilize the country. And this one comes to us from our own Rainer Shea. Take it away, Rainer.
We're in this situation where quite a lot of the world's states are at great risk of becoming destabilized in the coming decades due to climatic disasters, as well as due to the innate anemia economically that neoliberalism is bringing the capitalist world into. It seems like in the coming decades, the socialist countries, China, North Korea, Laos, Vietnam, and Cuba, are going to be probably the most stable countries due to their efficiency, their effectiveness in dealing with crises like COVID-19 and like the natural disasters that global warming is going to face civilization with. And the United States, it's been shown in this last year especially, is especially vulnerable to these types of destabilizing events because of the great inefficiency, ineffectiveness, lack of cohesion, dysfunctionality that America's deep embrace of neoliberal austerity politics has created for it. Like there's a reason why the United States has had by far the most COVID-19 deaths, like more than any other country on earth. It's because the United States has taken on the role as the core of global imperialism and has invested so much into its military that it's deeply deprived its people of social safety protections and health care relative even to the other core imperialist countries. So for this reason, it's especially vulnerable to COVID-19 and to the future, probably even worse pandemics that are going to occur in the coming decades due to global warming, as well as to all the other crises that capitalism and global warming are going to bring, such as rising sea levels, droughts, storms, fires, so on. And the capitalist ruling class in the United States aims to preempt their demise in the face of this by preemptively destabilizing the country, if that makes sense. The ruling class plans to apply its destabilizing tactics that it's applied to countries like Yugoslavia, Syria, Yemen, Libya, and so on, to the population within its own borders, so that it can preempt the impacts of global warming. This is what the ruling class is going to do. It's going to deliberately foment more violence, more poverty, deprive the people of humanitarian aid, increasingly place the American people under military occupation, enable events like the mass shootings that we've been experiencing these last few months. Mass shootings have been greatly on the rise throughout the Biden administration, as Biden has further militarized the U.S. police, funneling military equipment to U.S. police. All these kinds of factors, militarization, the careless proliferation of violence, the economic deprivation of the population, it all factors into this conspiracy that's going on to economically deprive the people and place us in physical danger, so that the costs of this crisis can be foisted onto the lower classes, which is basically the mission of neoliberalism. You turned it off. You turned off the sound.
I don't think I did that, but I must have hit that somehow when I was putting it down. I had to run away here for a second. I'm sorry. This is quite astounding to me, and it's inconceivable, if you think about it, that any government, that any state would contemplate this kind of an approach towards its own people, its own citizens. But we see it more and more every day, especially those of us on the left, those of us in the socialist movements. There's the case we just mentioned, the PSL. There's the case where the 4 PSL activists who were active in the anti-police state movements over the last summer, and who were arrested and charged with kidnapping. You remember that? Kidnapping the cops, the fucking cops. That was, you'd laugh, except that it's so serious, because these 4 people could get serious time in jail if they're convicted of this. That case is still ongoing, and the PSL is constantly reaching out for help on that by way of financial aid, because of course it's very costly to mount a defense, a legal defense for these people, to mount the publicity, the kind of publicity you need for this kind of an effort. And that's just one example. I mean, there were all the people in Portland and in Louisville, Kentucky, who they had the police, the federal police in uniforms that had no insignia on them and no badges, out kidnapping kids off the street and just holding them for 4 or 5 days and then letting them go. It's reminiscent of another story I'm going to be getting into that a couple of people have written about in the last week, that happened 50 years ago this past Monday, May 3rd, 1971. I was there. This was the largest mass arrest in American history. So we've seen this throughout American history at times, but never so much all coming at us all at once, the way we've seen, especially during the Black Lives Matters mass protests of millions and millions of people across this country and across the world against the police state over the last year, which is, both an example of how the police state represses, because there was a lot of repression going on there, but also an example of what you have to do to respond to this increased police state. So, yeah, it's inconceivable that the U.S. ruling class plans to destabilize the country, but that seems to be what they're doing. I shouldn't even say seems. That's too equivocal. Is that the word? Equivocal. They are doing that. It's just, it's beyond belief.
It's like when it's like when the Joker movie came out and all these these columnists were worrying about how the movie would inspire a mass shooting, and people were reacting to that by saying it's almost as if they want a mass shooting to happen to vindicate their irrational obsessive hatred of the movie Joker. but maybe we shouldn't be so lenient on them. Maybe we should not say it seems like, or it's almost as if, but they want it to happen.
Yeah, it's cultural, I guess. We're trained in this society to be go along to get along guys, and to use these weasel words like that that soften what we're saying, and often what we need is just to say it, the more direct approach. Topic number Topic number 3, the global anti-imperialist role of the Sino-Russian alliance. Now, the idea, at least for this discussion, comes from Danny Haifong. He's one of our favorite writers, friend of the show. I consider him a friend of the show. He's been on the show a few times, and Danny is an editor, writer for Black Agenda Report, which is the single best publication for the Black community, covering the Black community in America, in my opinion. The Black Agenda Report. It's a great publication, and Danny really does, I think, a great job in this particular article about talking about the anti-imperialist role of the Sino-Russian alliance and how important this Sino-Russian alliance is, and how the Sino-Russian alliance has become more and more stronger, more and more, stronger and more important in the whole global anti-imperialist movement. This article is published on the 29th of April, 2021. I'll include the link for the article under this episode of the show by Danny Haifong, Bar contributing editor. Danny, I'm not going to say a lot about this article, but I'm going to read you a couple of pull quotes from the article. He says, to begin with, growing ties between Russia and China present a new vision for global development, which is not bound to the violent limitations of U.S. empire. Well said, Danny. Yes. A new Cold War has emerged from the Pentagon's declaration that Russia and China have usurped terrorism as the #1 threat to U.S. hegemony in the 21st century. Sanctions and other forms of political welfare have been employed against Russia and China simultaneously, Danny says. Russia and China have only grown closer amid a U.S. facilitated global climate of destabilization and chaos. It is well understood across the U.S. foreign policy spectrum that success in containing China requires preventing Russia and China coming together. So that's really what the evildoers, the capitalist ruling class and its minions in Washington are up to. China and Russia are champions of a multipolar world, or one that ceases to be dominated by the interests of a single nation. So that gives you a flavor for this article. I recommend you try it out at theblackagendareport.com and look right under this episode for the link for that. Rainer?
No, this is an opportunity to both respond to this and at the same time preemptively cover the article I wrote this week that focuses on the exact same thing, but also a couple of other facets to this geopolitical shift that's going on. As I've observed, there are a couple of other ways that U.S. imperialist Cold War aggressions against Russia and China have been loosening Washington's grip over Eurasia in the coming months and years and decades. Well, when you count the Vietnam part, see, Vietnam has refused to ally with the U.S. in trying to establish missile bases around China. Vietnam, even though Vietnam was seen delusionally, is that a word? The Pentagon
Sounds
was
like
delusional.
it. I understand exactly what you mean. And they are delusional.
Yeah, the Pentagon was delusional in thinking that it could gain Vietnam as a military ally against China. And this is because, firstly, Washington has committed a genocide against Vietnam's people within living memory. And secondly, because as we've seen time and time again, when a relatively not so powerful group allies with the U.S. imperialists, they're going to get screwed over by the imperialists eventually, whether they're the Kurds when Trump enabled Erdogan to commit a genocide against them, or whether they're Saddam Hussein when Washington aligns with him 1 year and then seemingly just a few years later decides to wage wars and sanctions against him and eventually gets him executed. These kinds of weaselly behaviors by the U.S. imperialists have lost Washington the reliable allyship within conflicts like the Cold War with China, and a similar loss of international favor has been at play when it's come to Washington's relationship with the Chinese masses. As we observed last week, Washington's disgusting slanders against the Chinese people, like collectively claiming that their ruling party, the party that they voted for, has been committing a genocide against the Uyghurs, and Washington's efforts to drive down the living standards of those Uyghurs who Washington claims to want to help by imposing sanctions on China, Xinjiang in particular. These disgusting actions have lost Washington the goodwill of many of the Chinese people who used to apparently view the United States in a friendly way. Like they've become disillusioned, it seems, because of Washington's belligerent behavior towards them. This has, as Global Times put it, lost the U.S. almost all political influence within China. So we're seeing this trend across the board within Eurasia, from Russia to China to Vietnam, in a rejection of U.S. policies due to the transparent way that Washington has proved itself to be untrustworthy.
Yes, absolutely. Now, which article does that refer to?
It's the one I think I published it yesterday about how Washington's influence over Eurasia has been waning.
U.S. empire's influence wanes over within Eurasia, so we don't need to go on to that one, right? We can. You've just covered it. Is that it? Good.
Yeah.
Good. I'll just wipe that out. Yes, I agree 100%. I have not yet read the article. I will read it more thoroughly, and I recommend that listeners and viewers read it also. And as I always say, the link will be provided below. And let's see. Next, we have another one from Rainer Shea. 21st century anti-communism is a desperate cry from a dying order.
In the gray zone, there was this report in March about how this weird group of people and something called I think it's called the Uyghur American Association have been training with arms through a firm. I think it's a paramilitary firm called Alte Defense, where they shoot guns with their military uniforms and their American flag insignia. And there's a picture of them all putting their shotguns around an American flag insignia because they're so down with the fight. But what fight do they seriously hope to carry out? Like they're brandishing their guns, they're engaging in all of this bluster on Twitter. The brother of the firm's owner, one of the other Alte brothers, he's constantly posting inflammatory rhetoric about how we need to support the MAGA movement. I think he's a Trump supporter. Maybe that's just his brother. About how China is responsible for the virus. China needs to be punished. America is great. Yeah, I think he is a Trump supporter if he blames China for the virus. Anyway, these people, these anti-communist, self-styled anti-communist paramilitary fighters, they talk a big game and they like to shoot at their gun range, but they're not actually going to be able to wipe out China. They're not going to be able to defeat China with their little band of camo wearing dudes. And they're also not going to be able to ignite a civil war within China. Throughout these last few years, China's Uyghur de-radicalization program has made it so that there are no more Uyghur separatist terrorist attacks within Xinjiang. The era of terrorism has ended within China, much to the fury of these lunatics. And as China's material conditions improve, as the Uyghurs, like every other ethnic group within China, share in the benefits from socialism with Chinese characteristics, the contradictions that might hypothetically drive Uyghurs within China to commit more terrorist attacks are going away. Communism, in short, is strengthening, and there's nothing that these types can do about it. So all that they can do is turn their lust for bloodshed inwards. I think that guys like these, the guys in Alte Defense, they're going to be part of the vigilante force that tries to snuff out class struggle within the United States after we reach a real revolutionary crisis. At some point, all of these guys who are super committed to training with guns and to showing off their firearms and to stopping communism, at some point they're going to go into the streets and start committing terrorist attacks against the people in this country. And that's something we need to prepare for. We need to get armed and train ourselves. We need to establish safety protocols. We need to prepare for the moment when these types of anti-communist armed fanatics try to kill us and to kill the groups that we're trying to defend here, so that rather than the establishment of a Nazi-esque state within the United States, when the revolutionary crisis comes, we're going to be able to carry out an actual revolution. That's the desperate mission of these types of anti-communist fanatics within the imperial center. If they can't conquer China, they hope to fortify the capitalist order within where they live by carrying out massive bloodshed to try to crush the anti-colonial and class struggles.
Yeah, this is very reminiscent of the CIA caper that was sponsored by the Eisenhower and John F. Kennedy regimes, leading to the Bay of Pigs invasion, a U.S. sponsored, U.S. paid for, U.S. armed and trained invasion of Cuba in the early 60s. And how did that turn out? The Bay of Pigs, the Cuban people rallied and mobilized. The Cuban military and militias rallied and mobilized, and they were these gusanos, as they were called by the left, these Cuban emigres, basically bourgeois and petty bourgeois people who were angry that the working class had taken control of their own country in Cuba and fled from there and come to the United States and started working with the CIA. And they didn't even get off the beach. They landed on the beach. They didn't even get off the beach. It turned into a total disaster, total debacle. Kennedy, of course, tried to cover it all up initially, but it was difficult, impossible for him to cover up. So it all came out in the end, and Kennedy had egg on his face. Kennedy being the vile, imperialist, gruesome human being that he was. You know, he was exposed. Then he, in the end, he tried to blame it on Eisenhower. You know, he said, "Well, I inherited all this." Bullshit. He could have called that off at any moment, especially since it was illegal in the first place. It broke American laws. And just as what you're describing today breaks American laws, they don't give a fuck. They don't care. They think they're above the law. It's up to the American people to let them know you are not above the law, to start demanding the prosecution of these criminals. And that's exactly what they are, whether they work for the CIA, whether they're in the Trump administration, or whether they're in the Biden administration, because all of those actors are guilty. All of them. Yeah, and it's a joke. I mean, this is not the world of 1962, you know, or 61 or what. 62 is when that happened. It's not the world of 1962. This is this is 2021, and the world has changed quite drastically. And America will definitely not get away with this kind of you know, right within this country, this kind of training these terrorist Uyghurs to do terrorist acts. And you're right, these people always end up being used by the imperialists for other reasons. The imperialists know that they can't invade any part of China, even Xinjiang, the most northwestern part of a province in China. They know that they can't invade that. They won't last long. They'll be like the gusanos on the Bay of Pigs, on the beach, being stuck there, pinned down by the mobilization of the people. And believe me, even Uyghurs in Xinjiang will mobilize against these people, because they understand, as you've explained amply and well, they understand the great strides forward, the great advances that they've made under socialism with Chinese characteristics. They're not going to give that up. They're living much better lives now than they were 10 or 15 or 50 years ago, certainly than 50 years ago. Anyway, let's see. Next on the list, climate catastrophe and the next wave of genocides. This one's also by Rainer Shea.
There's an aspect to the Holocaust that doesn't usually get talked about. It's the aspect that really shows how Hitler's philosophy mirrored the United States settler colonial philosophy. It's all about this idea of the need to take land for the supposedly superior nation to prosper. Hitler's word for it was Lebensraum. He believed that in order to prosper, Germany needs to take control of all of this land, initially by conquering most of Europe, and then ultimately by conquering the Slavs, by conquering all of Russia. He apparently viewed the Slavs, the Russians, as the same way that the U.S. settler colonialists view the natives here. He believed that they needed to be exterminated so that Germany could take control of their lands and exploit those lands accordingly. And he viewed the Jews as getting in the way of that racial war for racial conquest by the Aryans. So he initially set out to exterminate the Jews. This is the baseline logic behind this murderous ideology that could rationalize trying to wipe out entire ethnic groups. trying to conquer entire countries. And it's basically the same ideology driving U.S. settler colonialism, driving Hindutva fascism, which has been colonizing Kashmir and trying to exterminate the Muslims in order to fortify its colonization of Kashmir. It's also the same ideology behind Zionism, where in Israel they're trying to exterminate, or at least culturally erase, the Palestinians so that they can seize control of all of this land. This is the baseline for the Nazistic ideologies that are driving things like the BJP's colonization of Kashmir. The BJP is the fascist ruling party in India. It's driving all of these modern parallels to what the Nazis did, and it's going to gain more relevance in the coming decades as land itself becomes scarcer, as the resource collapse, the agricultural and water systems collapse from global warming, make land scarcer. And this is going to prompt the fascists to try to whip people up into the kind of frenzy, the kind of scarcity mentality that rationalized Hitler's invasion of so much of Europe and Hitler's attempts to exterminate entire ethnic groups. We're going to see potentially a lot of repeats of Nazi Germany in places like India, places like Israel, if Israel is still surviving by then. And we're going to certainly see it in the United States, which is the core of global imperialism. And I think one of the prime locations for genocide in the coming decades. I think it's where we're living is perhaps the most worrying part of the world, because in this regard, the biggest risk factor for genocide, because places like Brazil and India are neo-colonies of the imperialists, and they have the potential to experience revolutions before the core imperialist countries do. And Israel is so lacking in land and power relative to the established nations there, that it's dubious whether whether the Zionist state will live to be a century. Thus, it's no wonder why the Zionists want to seize control of so much land, because they're scared existentially for the future of their genocidal project, and they want to preserve it by seizing control of more land, gaining more strategic advantage through that means. And of course, that entails trying to kill even more Palestinians. It's a murderous cycle. It's a death cult, and it's going to gain more cultural traction in reaction to global warming.
Yes, I think that's an accurate analysis, unfortunately. And it's frightening, but you can either be an ostrich and bury your head in the sand, or you can stand up and start doing something about it. We need, as a world, as a globe, as a whole species, we need to come together, because this is not what most people want to see. We need to start talking more about the methods that they use, the CIA and the Zionists and other evildoers, the methods they use to promote and foster ethnic hatreds, religious hatreds, anything that'll divide the working class. We need to talk more about that. Finally, on our list tonight, the biggest bust ever bust. That's lingo from my day back in the day in the 70s, meaning arrest. It's the biggest mass arrest in American history. I think I may have mentioned this in a previous episode, but it says direct action lessons from 3 days in May 1971. And this is referring actually to an event that I participated in and was arrested in when I was 17 years old, I think. An action against the Vietnam War, against the U.S. war against the people of Vietnam. And in it, more than 12,000 people. I actually remember 17,000 people being arrested and being a part of the mass action suit that followed against the government. But the references I've found say 12,000, so we'll go with that. And there's actually 2 articles. One of them, and that's the biggest bust ever article, is by Steve Early, in counterpunch.org. And another article that appeared this week from consortiumnews.com. And that was a reprint, actually. It was by Bob Perry. And Bob Perry was the founder of consortiumnews.com. He was an award-winning investigative journalist, a stupendous journalist. He died last year, I believe it was. Unfortunately, died fairly young. He's a little bit older than me, but still not that old. And Bob Perry was also swept up in this and arrested in this action. This was at a time when the youth in America had been protesting the Vietnam War for quite some time, and were starting to lose faith in peaceful demonstrations, of which there had been many, some of them very, very large, in the hundreds of thousands. I attended several of them myself in those days. But on May, actually the series of arrests started on May 1st, because there was a series of actions. Started on May 1st and went through to May 5th. I was arrested on May 3rd, which was a Monday, I believe, and it was a day when youth from across America had come to the nation's capital to shut it down. That was our objective, our goal. And anyway, I, along with 7 of my friends, including my girlfriend at that time, who later became my first wife, were arrested, and lots of other people too. Anyway, I will include links to this thing. I think it's just the fact that it's the largest single mass arrest in American history makes it something historic, at least. And it's something also, like the guy in Counterpunch is pointing out, that should be studied for the lessons there. And there are lessons. Direct action, that it probably was not the way to go at that time. But, if you're willing to get arrested and, you want to put your life and limb on the line like that, we're not going to stop you. But it was a big event, I think, in the history of the anti-Vietnam War movement. And if you are interested in that thing, which I hope you are, anyone at least in America, should be interested in that, and anyone in the other countries that were involved in this imperialist invasion and occupation of Vietnam, like those in Australia, for example, should be interested in this as well. I will include the links to the Counterpunch article and the Consortium News article under this, below us here, below this episode. So, Rainer, thoughts?
Sounds kind of benign, honestly, in U.S. history. I mean, the United States has always been so prone to acts of dramatic repression, because the United States is like when you look behind the veneer, it doesn't seem so much like a real country, so much as a mishmash of cultures that are trying to be overridden constantly by this fabricated American identity, and by constant violence from the state, also by the economically violent policies that are enacted against the proletariat, the poor, and the oppressed nationalities. This is the mess that the United States has always been and always will be, and we can see with things like the what was it, the Portland suppression that you described, where the unmarked federal agents put random people into unmarked vehicles. Things like the Capitol Hill riots, things like Kyle Rittenhouse, this teenager with a gun randomly coming and shooting a couple of people at a protest to protect private property. This is the violent paradigm that America has always, will always be embroiled within for as long as America exists. The only way to create a new paradigm is to abolish the United States and establish a new system of governance, ideally one where the indigenous First Nations get back all of their sovereignty that was taken from them, that they get their ability to govern the land that they rightfully own, and also where a socialist worker state is set up in what formerly used to be the United States.
Yeah. And, you know, what you're describing, you're right. It isn't really a country. It isn't a nation. It's an empire. And the United States, from the get-go, and, you know, the founding fathers wrote about this, wrote about their desire to create an empire. And it was an empire, and it has been ever since. It operates as an empire. They were very influenced by the Romans 2000, whatever it was, 17, 18,000 years, 1800 years before. And the Romans called themselves a republic, which is what the United States calls itself, long, long after it had become an empire. An empire is a forced uniting of several countries. And you're always going to get conflict and turmoil out of that when you force nations into a union that they don't agree with. You know, that was the difference when the Soviet Union came along, because the Soviet Union was built originally out of most of the former Tsarist Russian Empire, but they first made agreement with each of these nations as to whether they wanted to enter the Union of Soviet Socialist republics, the USSR. That was the difference. You know, I mean, that, you know, I was thinking of this today because I was doing a lot of research on the history of Ukraine, what's called Ukraine now. And a huge part, about a third of Ukraine, the Russian, you know, very Russian part of Ukraine, the eastern third of the Ukraine, came in under possession of Ukraine in 1922, and it was a dickering, a deal. The Soviet authorities under Lenin's authority and direction made this deal with the Ukraine. We'll give you this whole extra space that's now part of Russia, you know, if you join our union, you know. And I mean, actually, if you reading this history of Ukraine, Ukraine was literally less than half the size it is now when prior to that event, prior to getting all that extra land from Russia, prior to a couple of other events like 1954, when Khrushchev, who was a Ukrainian, gave Crimea to the Ukrainian Federal Socialist Republic. And after World War II, when a whole bunch of formerly Nazi-controlled territory was taken into Ukraine as well. So you can imagine, what do you have in Ukraine now? You have all these ethnic minorities, these nationalities, these nations being forced together, and you have the CIA going in there starting in 2014 and deliberately fomenting ethnic turmoil and ethnic hatreds in the same way that they did in Yugoslavia. Just as you were discussing in the point earlier about how they are deliberately seeking genocides, these new genocides and these new ethnic cleansings. So, yeah. Is that it?
Yes.
Okay. Good job, Rainer. Thank you so much. Thank all of our viewers. Come back to us again next week, please. I hope you got something out of this. And until then, I bid you all a sweet adieu. So long, Rainer.